Okay, welcome everyone. I think we might kick off. So hopefully you're all in the right room. This is Stream A, and this session is titled Building a Bridge to China. And I want to spend some time with our impressive lineup of panelists here, just asking a little bit how we're going to recover from the disruption that's happened from COVID over the last few months, and also how they see their respective industries adapting into the future. Now, we only have an hour for this panel, and I'm aware that it's quite a large panel, and we've got some diverse sectors here on the stage. So I want to jump right in and ask a few questions from each of you covering your respective sectors, and then we'll move on to a panel discussion. So I'll bring in Pier Smulders first, who is the country manager for Alibaba, which is, of course, we all know, is the world's largest online and mobile commerce company. Pier, I wanted to begin by asking you about digital, because we've heard a lot today about digital really coming into its own over this period. And I think many organisations here in New Zealand have said they've advanced 5 or 10 years even in terms of their capability. Have you seen similar trends in China, and do you expect that to continue?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for everyone here and many of our clients here, and it's great to see you all. And if we haven't caught up, please, hopefully we'll catch up in the drinks afterwards. Absolutely the same trend in China, and it has happened where there's been a big shift to particularly to online e-commerce. And because of the size of the China retail economy, those numbers are by virtue of that size huge. Now, normally I would, if you see me speak before, I don't normally have notes, but when I'm talking statistics of China, and last night I really had to get my spreadsheet out to make sure I was getting the numbers in the right denomination. But the share of total retail, according to China statistics, has gone from 20 to 25% of total retail in 6 months. That's a huge shift, which has been a 14.3% growth, whereas the overall retail market declined by about 11%. But it's the raw numbers within that are really interesting. The difference, so just the growth on last year in online sales is about 100 billion New Zealand dollars over 6 months. So, you know, we only need, we being New Zealand, we only need to get, you know, a little piece of all that growth to have phenomenal businesses for any of us. Now that is of course reflecting the whole of the Chinese retail online business, but it shows you that movements of a few percent are really meaningful. But probably even broader than that, than the numbers, are the changes in some of the behaviors and habits. So a McKinsey report that was looking at this a few weeks ago said it was a profound and persistent impact on shopping habits of consumers in China. So what I would really challenge business to think about, even those companies that are maybe not traditionally in e-commerce in China. So you might be in a more commodity space, you might be in the meat business, you might have a strong offline business, but your consumers are engaging digitally. And there was, I think Nicola from Lewis Road mentioned this afternoon, it's not so much about digital, it's just how you communicate with your customers. So to me, the shift is very meaningful in terms of revenue opportunities, but it's just as meaningful in terms of engaging with your customers and how you do that. And so, yeah, that to me is a really important shift. It's not easy, but it's probably easier if you think about it to access consumers digitally and sell through e-commerce in a market like China than it is to try to, you know, have distribution, physical distribution and retail throughout the whole of China.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought, just for something a little bit different, I thought it might be interesting to run a poll for this session on Slido. So I've put a poll question up there that asks, do you expect the way you conduct business post-COVID to change due to the uptake of digital tools? So if the audience is able to, throughout the course of this, head on to Slido and answer that poll, we'll have the results at the end. I think it might be just interesting to see how that comes out. Pier, I also wanted to just ask you, you know, we've heard a lot today about the need to keep brand New Zealand alive over the next, you know, who knows how long until international travel can pick up again. What would you suggest we should be thinking about?
The first observation is have we in the past properly valued the Chinese students, the Chinese visitors, and probably our Chinese community in New Zealand. And by valued, I mean the way that we statistically measure that. So we measure, for example, with tourists, they come here, how many are there, what do they spend? But have we thought about the value of those tourists and students as ambassadors for New Zealand products and brand New Zealand? I think that's a really important aspect, and we've obviously now through the COVID lockdown, the COVID border closure, we have lost that. But I think when we think about those people coming back, our visitors and our students from China, their role is much more than just being students and visitors. They really have an opportunity to build brand New Zealand. And I think there are strategies. We were starting to talk about this a lot before the lockdown, before the crisis, about thinking, how do you actually use digital tools to engage with those visitors while they're here? So wine tourism, food tourism, and supply chain innovations around that. So, for example, if you have some Chinese visitors come to your vineyard, they buy one bottle, but then how do you actually, ship a case to them back in China, and do that all digitally? And a lot of entrepreneurs and often Chinese New Zealanders have done that. They would ship stuff, but you can actually really digitize those tools. So, I think it's planning ahead for that is a big one, and thinking about how when those people come back, how can we really get them to help brand New Zealand? It was really cool to hear this morning that there is now a collaboration between Tourism New Zealand, New Zealand Story, and NZT around that brand New Zealand story. And I would hope that continues into the future, that we don't see tourism and we don't see education and we don't see exports as separate things. They, especially in China, when you think about digital engagement, digital tools, they're kind of all part of the same thing. Those people who come to New Zealand to live here and study here or to visit, are all potentially great ambassadors for New Zealand and our products and services.
Yeah, thanks. And that's actually a perfect lead-in now to Lisa Lee. Thanks, Pier. Lisa Lee is the Managing Director for China Travel Service, and of course you started working at China Travel Service in China, which in the year 2000, I think, and then you came and opened the New Zealand branch of China Travel Service in New Zealand. And you've overseen the growth of the company to become one of the premier China specialists for inbound Chinese tourists. What Pier said, which aligns so well with what you and I were talking about just earlier, actually, is that you've started to shift to use social media to market non-travel goods now. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I totally agree with what Pier just mentioned. That's what Tourism New Zealand and NZT doing in China market. And as a diversificating business, as all you know, that really the people talk to me in a way of full of sympathy. And we actually are much more. Since we actually been first, we are the business the first hit actually since the last week of January. And so have been gone through all this outbreak in China and pandemic in the whole world and the lockdown in New Zealand. We actually, because of the length of the time, I think we actually getting more and more used to it, new normal. And so when the border is closed, and someone joked that we cannot run the tourism business because no business model is on the zero income. So we have to pivot us to some other things. And the one thing we actually tried, because we actually do domestic tourism is a part of our business. And because as you know that Prime Minister also mentioned this morning that we have over 200,000 ethnic Chinese living in New Zealand. So it's a large market. And also, again, they are the advocates of our New Zealand tourism and the products, because we absolutely benefited from the word of the mouth as a destination. And on the other hand, with the borders closed, and what we can do for the international tourism. And I think this morning, this afternoon, and on the last session, people were talking about the New Zealand food basket. Last year, actually, with the support of NZT and the Auckland Airport, we have been working with the New Zealand Food Basket, launched they call the New Zealand Gourmet Food Tour. The concept is we actually wanted to bring our Chinese visitors to those places who produce the premium New Zealand products like food and wine, and have them to have a taste. And then so in the way of the appreciate of our beautiful landscape, and also have appreciate our premier products of New Zealand. So that makes us thinking that now the border is closed, the people cannot move, but can we do something is we actually can, the products are still there, and we can move the products to our customers. And the strength of our business is being in this industry for 20 years. We have extensive customer relations. We have a huge customer database. And also, like Pier said, that the people who has exposed the Chinese visitors, the Chinese customer who has been exposed to New Zealand products, or who have been to New Zealand particularly, are really the loyal to our New Zealand brand and the favorite of our New Zealand brands. So that's make us is thinking that we probably can start to do something. And again, the e-commerce and the digital, online, make it as possible. For us, we have never been on this world before, but those are the tours and make it possible. So we start to launch that we call the CTS Choice. And because luckily, the brand of CTS is actually being highly regarded by the community in New Zealand, Chinese community in New Zealand, and also back in China is a household name. So we said we carefully chose the New Zealand product for you, for our customers. So because you trust us, you trust the products we choose for you. So on that concept, we launched this CTS Choice on our social platform and to selling that non-travel products.
And we heard also from Hu Shili today about the positive thoughts that China has towards New Zealand because of our similar way of tackling COVID. Are you sort of seeing that from your customers as well?
Absolutely. I think this New Zealand was regarded as by the Chinese visitors as a clean, green, and a safe destination. And the success of our handling this health crisis make us absolutely stand out as a destination that most favorable by the customers from China, even though the border is still closed, but they actually do really respect the success we have done here. And also because we attribute our success of handling this crisis to the compliance, the outstanding leadership, and the compliance and the people's integrity. And those are the points which Chinese attributed to their success of handling the COVID-19 crisis. So that make them to appreciate the success of New Zealand has made very much. So all those points made us actually really has a real standout compared to our long-haul travel competitors. And given the border border control is relaxed, we believe that we will absolutely become their favorable destination choice. But this again, those are the points of the products of New Zealand's products make them favorable by the customers in China too.
Great, thank you. I'd now like to bring in Adrienne Young-Cooper, who was involved in the planning for Queenstown Airport and has been on the board since 2017 and is currently the acting chair. Adrienne has an impressive history of governance roles that have spanned large infrastructure projects, housing and urban growth and transport, including chair of Auckland Transport and Panuku Development. Adrienne, I wanted to ask you, first of all, Chinese tourists have been a key part of the growth of Queenstown, and it seems like nearly everybody I've spoken to has been to Queenstown over the past month or so, New Zealanders. How has the COVID crisis affected Queenstown Airport?
Thank you, Tim. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I suppose, when you've got a strip of concrete in one of the most gorgeous places on the planet that relies upon people and planes, and you have borders closed and you have lockdown of the entire human population of New Zealand, you do end up with a very significant business issue. So for 5 weeks, essentially, we had the airport closed except for essential services, and that meant that we were actually able to play cricket on the runway, and we did have a couple of Facebook posts on that, just to illustrate the point. Basically, every business, and there's plenty of people in this room, understand that you don't have a business without revenue. We're essentially we're not a highly diversified airport with a great property portfolio. We actually rely upon planes landing and people coming in through airside to landside. That, and in fact, we're a huge gateway for the whole Southern Lakes region for its tourism industry, and over 40% of tourists actually arrive through airside. So the impact on the airport itself has been huge. We are very pleased that the team of 5 million did actually manage to, at this stage, and we hope this continues, but we have actually eliminated the virus as far as we know, apart from quarantine facilities, which has enabled us to travel again. And actually travelling within New Zealand has meant that for the Queenstown Airport, we're probably over the next 12 months will enjoy something like 40% of our pre-COVID traffic. So before COVID, we were up to about 2.3, 2.4 million passengers a year, and with a reasonably conservative outlook, we think we're about, on a positive day, about 900,000, 800,000. Now that makes this a significantly changed business, and that's hugely impacted by actually the loss of two really key markets from our perspective. One is Trans-Tasman and the Australians, who are a huge part of tourism down there, and the second is China. We've also, the American market has also been very important to that part of the world, but we do expect that America will be an awful long time recovering, and our borders are probably going to be less permeable, I imagine, for quite a long time for that, as opposed to China, where there's been a very strong response to the virus in the same way as we've seen in New Zealand and even the Australians until a couple of weeks ago.
It's interesting you say that, because I think we've heard quite a lot today about airlines, but we haven't perhaps talked much about airport viability. So what would you say that this means in terms of just the viability of airports going forward?
Well, there are 40, I'm told, I've actually read there are 42 airports in New Zealand that are registered in the Airports Association. There's actually more than that, but there are at least 42. Those airports will all be in a different position depending upon the size of them, their exposure to different kinds of markets. With respect to Queenstown Airport, we have, like many businesses, have had to do a very rapid and drastic cut to our costs. We had very good facilities in place already with a family of bankers, and we've had very positive discussions with those. And it was very important to us that we actually get the airport open. Actually, people coming airside through the airport is a critical part of our revenue, and that has happened. And we expect that, we're very hopeful we won't go into another domestic lockdown. But if we did, we do actually have the ability to carry on for quite a long period. But we've basically had to cut costs hugely.
Thank you. I'd like to now bring in Rachel Maidment, who was New Zealand's Consul General in Guangzhou from 2016 to 2019, which was a period of massive development in our relationship with China. And she's now the Executive Director of the New Zealand-China Council, which is a cross-sector peak body for the New Zealand-China relationship. Rachel, we've heard a little bit about this today, but I wanted to ask you about it specifically, the Southern Link. So this is something that you've been working on for quite some time, the Council at least. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how the concept came about?
Sure, thanks, Tim. So the concept came about, it's been around for a while, but it really mostly was driven by New Zealand having an MOA with China on the Belt and Road in 2017. About how we could engage with China on the Belt and Road. And from that, the China Council commissioned a report by PwC into ways that New Zealand specifically could engage in the Belt and Road. And one of the ideas that flowed from that was the Southern Link. And the Southern Link concept, a lot of you would have heard about it today, but you're probably wondering, what exactly is it? And essentially, this concept takes New Zealand, as you know, we're often not even on the map, and it puts us in the centre of a map. It basically has New Zealand acting as a hub between Latin America and China and the broader Asia region.
Okay, and I think it was almost exactly this time last year that you held the Building the Southern Link conference. What can you tell us, what's happened since then, and how has COVID affected the concept of the Southern Link?
Yes, the Southern Link conference was held last year, and that brought major stakeholders together from Latin America and from China. And some of the key things that came out of that were, firstly, this was a definite possibility. I mean, there are several reasons why this is a good idea, and one is distance. For freight, for example, for sea freight, we're actually 1,000 kilometres closer. The distance is shorter than to Brisbane port, for example, which is the closest port in Australia. And we're also much faster to fly, and it's of course better for the environment, from certain parts of China to certain places in Latin America. So there was a clear environmental benefit plus sort of speed and time benefit flowing from that. The other thing that came out of the conference is that there was only going to be one hub in the Southern Hemisphere. It was going to be Australia or New Zealand, and of course we wanted that to be us.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
I guess since then, what we have seen is that the Southern Link now with COVID, post-COVID, has started to come into action. So a few key things that have happened. Firstly, a couple of weeks before COVID started, a freight forwarder that's on our working group, because we have a working group that comprises of public and private sector stakeholders, started to use the Southern Link for e-commerce. And what they found was that their previous route went through Paris, through Charles de Gaulle Airport, and that was taking 4 weeks. And when they started using the Southern Link, hubbing e-commerce freight through Auckland, it took a week. They were really shocked and surprised. They didn't expect it to be that quick, and they said, in their words, it smashed their KPIs. It was just a lot quicker and more efficient than they anticipated. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was that it was so effective because New Zealand was so good and experienced at dealing with China. And I think over the years I've seen us underestimate our ability and capability in that area, but we were the first Western developed country to sign an FTA with China, and we do have a lot of capability in that area. And then once COVID hit, they were worried that that wouldn't continue. But what we actually saw was, I was sitting at home, and my husband's an air traffic controller, and he rang me up and said, I've just controlled a plane going direct from Latin America to China, and the Southern Link is actually happening. So over COVID, 2 Latin American carriers actually started flying for the first time direct from Latin America via Auckland to China, transporting PPE. So whilst it was special circumstances, it does prove proof of concept because they worked with MOT and others to get this happening very quickly, and they did choose us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think one of the great things about the conference today has been those little bits of good news that have come out of COVID, and that's one of them. Thanks for that. I'd like to bring in now Professor Jenny Dixon into the conversation. Thanks for being so patient. Professor Dixon is Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Auckland and is responsible for strategic engagement, which keeps her busy, I'm sure, with many responsibilities. Jenny, I wanted to ask you about the education sector. Clearly that's been hit very hard with COVID. How has the university been affected? Could you just give us an outline of that?
Okay, thank you. So it's quite a big question, of course. Strategically, I think what COVID has done is accelerate some of the meta trends that we've been anticipating for quite a long time. So, for example, the future of work, well, it's here, digital delivery, and many other of those kind of major issues that we've been discussing. And along with that, I must say, a pretty failed funding model for New Zealand universities, which is the case, of course, across many other countries. So, but we got really into business pretty quickly. Now, perhaps before I go any further, it might be just useful to note that last year we had just under 9,000 international students from many countries, but 50% of those students are from mainland China, and that represents around 20% of our student body. So at the beginning of the year, we did have many international students already on campus, but of course there were some who couldn't reach us. So we were actually able to sort of implement quite a number of innovations to really work with our students and to help them continue their studies, because of course some of them were already studying with us, they were going into their second year, there were some new students as well. So we implemented study plans to work with each student, and once we got into lockdown and the whole university went very quickly to online delivery. So those people who think universities can't change quickly, well, I can assure you we did. Within a few days, in fact. We took a non-teaching week on the Monday, and by Thursday I think we'd gone into lockdown. So that gave staff a little bit of time to get organised. And then as time has gone on, of course, we've been watching the skies with pretty close attention to see what might be happening with the border. That's been quite an issue for us because it's caused massive uncertainty. But we've also looked very carefully for this coming semester, and the Prime Minister this morning noted a couple of our two learning centres that we've set up with two close partners in China, Southwest in Chongqing and Northeast Forestry University in Harbin. And that has enabled us to actually have two bases in China for students who are living outside those two cities, who are able to go there and actually have an experience, receive our classes online, but have some local tutoring, and of course have an on-campus experience. And we're doing a number of other things as well, really to try and keep our students engaged. And then of course, and we've developed a quarantine plan so that we feel that we are able to we could organise quarantine for our students. And now it's really just watching and seeing what happens over the next few months in terms of the borders and some of the bigger picture issues that the government's now dealing with in terms of giving priority to, of course, returning New Zealanders at this point. I think there is an issue around social licence for international education, which I think the government and others we're all aware of, and quite a number of those issues. And I think we've just got to work our way through those with a view to looking at 21 in terms of return of students.
Yeah, and I think what the Prime Minister said about 21 was quite interesting. Clearly, I think semester 2 at the university starts next week, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, another week. And I'm delighted to say that we've had 300 at least sign up for the learning centres. I think we've got something like another 1,000 students online. We won't really know, though, the full impact of the effect on the university until about early August, when the numbers all settle. And that'll then give us a much bigger, or a much clearer picture then of what we're talking about in terms of a deficit.
I'd like to just move on now a little bit and talk with the whole panel about building that sort of building a bridge to China for the future that we've sort of touched on a little. And Jenny, perhaps I'll start with you since you just wrapped up. But I'm wondering what you're thinking about in the longer term. What sort of initiatives is the university thinking about?
Well, I do think this is all. I really do think this is going to lead to a transformation of the university sector. I think there's no question that as a consequence of this impact, it's going to have an impact sort of not just this year, but next year and the year after, particularly if it slows down our pipeline of students. So that means that the university sector is going to have to take a long, hard look at itself in terms of how it wants to reconstruct itself going forward. And I would see some significant change. It also coincides with a time when the University of Auckland is embarking on a new strategic plan, and we're going to be looking quite closely at how do we perceive international education going forward. But there's absolutely no question that it's not necessarily going to be the same as it has been. It's going to be different. I think the size of the sector could also be different. And don't forget that our competitor countries are also going through the same sorts of thinking and changes that we will be.
Yeah, and I guess along the same lines, Adrienne, I'd like to just come back to you and ask you what Queenstown Airport is thinking or is currently doing to maintain those links with China, particularly with the uncertain future that you're facing.
Well, perhaps I could just go sort of slightly up on the helicopter and then back down again.
Sure.
So look, I think the first thing is that in terms of our medium-term planning, we are anticipating that there will be a significantly smaller sector in terms of the airline industry and therefore the demand on our services, certainly for the next 4 to 5 years. So we don't anticipate a rapid V climb out of where we were pre-COVID. So that really means that in many respects we have to think about our business a little differently. One of the things that the Tourism New Zealand and also Destination Queenstown have been focusing on is really sort of trying to deepen the experience of Chinese visitors, and we have noted that there is an increasing trend of free and independent traveller as Chinese actually are returning many times to New Zealand and they have confidence to actually experience tourism differently. So that's so one of the things that's happening right now, and we're not directly engaged, but we are engaged in partnership in general with Destination Queenstown, is basically looking at this time to help basically reposition what Queenstown, the Southern Lakes, is to its international tourists. There is actually right now there is a development of a new tourism strategy. And there is and there is some education going on directly with travel folk in China in terms of at that trade level. And that really, we expect that like Kiwis, once we got out of lockdown, out of our own homes, we all basically burst out and travelled all around the country. I was out and about Queen's birthday weekend, it was amazing. We also anticipate that when the Trans-Tasman Safe Travel Zone is established, that there will be, quite a big pent-up demand, at least in the short term. And we also anticipate that when we get our border is opened safely with some perhaps countries first that have a similar public health profile to ourselves from Asia, that they will be looking at New Zealand as a great place for them to choose for their pent-up travel demands. It will be really important from New Zealand's perspective that Queenstown is up and ready. Now, the issue that we've got, of course, is that in Queenstown there is actually a huge dependence upon the international travel market, and we could be in this waiting zone for quite a few months, many months, and not every business is going to be able to survive. So we haven't really got past that, so that there are mayoral task force that have been established to look at the immediate recovery, but there's a reality about actually people not coming in through the door, and probably safely won't for some time yet. So look, we're keeping the links alive, but I don't think we should underestimate how complex the issues are going to be, country to country, and actually how challenging it's going to be once we, from just suddenly turning on a tap, it's not going to be quite that easy. We have to. So I'm not part of the mayoral task force, but I can imagine they'll be talking about it.
Yeah. Pier, did you?
Yeah, no, just to expand on part of what you said, Adrienne. I mean, one of the I think opportunities, and this is something that can certainly happen at a strategic level through DQ or more broadly for New Zealand tourism. But also, if I was a tourism operator who had some experience with the Chinese consumer, I would really be thinking about that up to 2 million ethnic Chinese in Australia. They consume a lot of the same digital tools that mainland Chinese tourists do. So you can reach them through many of the same platforms, Alipay, WeChat, whatever other platforms people use. That's a huge opportunity to target those, and they probably in many cases won't be caught by a lot of the kind of mainstream campaigns and outreach. So I think there's an opportunity there for operators to target those customers as well. I mean, there's 200,000 in New Zealand, right? So there's a great opportunity to get those people to come to Queenstown or wherever. But I think that Australian market is even, it's like 10 times bigger. So I would start tourism operators thinking about that's a kind of really powerful niche within that Trans-Tasman bubble.
Yeah, it's a really good thought. Lisa, I'd like to ask you just a similar question about maintaining those links with China, and specifically with your the travel side of your business. What are you doing, or what do you plan to do to make sure that New Zealand is top of mind for tourists when borders do slowly begin to open up? Tourism is a very competitive environment. How do you encourage them to come to New Zealand?
Well, we actually have never stopped our trying to be engaged with our customers. Even the border is closed. Actually, the border was closed to the Chinese nationals on 2nd of February. So, and we actually been trying to, because all those thanks to all those to those social media platforms like WeChat, like Chinese TikTok, Douyin, and the Little Red Book, and we all have our official accounts there. And so our my colleagues, they so good that because a bunch of the young, very young people, and they're very active, and also know how to manage those social media and keep ourselves engaged with our customers. And also the very important that through those platforms, we're trying to deliver those positive messages that what we have done in New Zealand, what Kiwi is doing, how we fighting with this COVID-19, and what actually, for example, like we did that the mobile queue system at our parking sieve, and that message we've been posted on the Douyin, the Chinese TikTok, and it has been well received. And the Chinese think, oh, the smart Kiwi, right? And so all those messages is actually keep us engaged. And on the other hand, the reason why we're doing this selling on the non-travel products is also the way we're trying to engage ourselves with the customers, because you always have to find a way to do that, right? And so the long term, and unfortunately, we actually, I think, approaching the end of April, and the Minister of the Tourism called us on that we rethink tourism, and then we actually also we see our New Zealand's success. We were really joyful that we're seeing that we have been containing this virus successfully and approaching the level 1, and we actually quite promising, and we started to be prepared to launch this domestic tourism campaign, which targeting on this ethnic Chinese market. We also get ourselves ready for the cross-Tasman for Australia diaspora, because that's also the market we've been doing for years. Like Pier said, there's over 1 million ethnic Chinese living there. And so we will be very exciting to see that the discussion on this Trans-Tasman bubble, and we're actually looking forward to include China into our travel bubbles next. Well, with all this since the second wave and a lot of uncertainties, we just feel that really this is something we have to look at long term. And so long term, again, we thought that the strategy we have been first set up is trying to be pivoting to this non-travel products and use make use of this technology, this digital tools. It could be something for us to look at the long term. And as we believe trade and tourism are symbiotic. And this should be the complement to what we done in the past, the tourism world. But long term and someday, given the borders open, that's the successful way we actually keep our customers always engaged with us, and so we know our customers always there. We actually increased our customer base in that way. And also, again, for those people that time, and we are able to bring them back and said, you have tried all those beautiful New Zealand products and you trust them. You like those products. Now you come to New Zealand and go to the place, we take you to the place where those products come from. So I really think this makes sense.
And sorry, I don't want to monopolize, but I think that the other really important point that Lisa, there is some, there's been some, in the past there were negative comments about Chinese visitors to New Zealand. Maybe you don't realize how good something is until it's gone. But I really hope that if you look at the Chinese visitor, as I said, and the Chinese student more holistically, they add a lot of value to New Zealand. So I really hope we welcome them back. I think the good news is that the trend is going to be more FIT travelers coming back, which are, I guess, if you're going to compare the groups versus the FITs are better because they spend more money and explore our country more independently. But yeah, I just hope we really welcome them back, with open arms, with whatever, whenever that is. I think that's really important too. So maybe people realize now that when the tourists are not here, that we kind of quite like the tourists, even though maybe, they were sometimes causing some traffic and so on.
Yeah, I think those are some great points. Rachel, I just want to just close off our conversation about the Southern Link before going out to the audience, who I'm sure have plenty of questions. But what's next for the Southern Link? So we've trialled it now. We've had it, proven that it works. So what do you expect to happen from here?
So the next step is commissioning a study to really assess the size of the prize and look at the challenges that lie ahead. And I think what is really clear is that this is a very different study to what we originally envisaged. A lot of the study was going to be looking at existing trade flows, passenger flows, etc. And as our Minister for Trade and Economic Growth, and as Greg Foran noted earlier today, the post-COVID world is going to look completely different. A lot of those airlines that are operating today might not be operating tomorrow, and some of the routes and operational issues are going to be changed. So it's going to be really trying to look into a crystal ball, but I think it is important to do it because also, like many speakers have said today, the Chinese have this word weiji, crisis and opportunity. We've heard it multiple times, and this really does offer us an opportunity to try and position us in the centre rather than on the outskirts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I might throw to the floor now if there's any questions. And also, I'm not sure, we don't have the questions on the screens here or the timer, so if I could get those, that would be helpful. But are there any questions from the floor? Can't see a thing. Any questions? Okay, we've got some on the screen now. Okay, yeah, I think the top one was a previous question. Yes, these are all old questions. Okay, that's all right.
We could all answer them in a different
I'm sure we could. One thing that I would be interested just to get the brains on the panel here to think about is what it will take to reinstate safe travel. We've heard lots of different ideas, and I think everyone's got an opinion in the media. But what would you, particularly for your respective sectors, what would you like to see to reinstate safe travel to New Zealand?
Perhaps I could just make just a couple of comments. In a very unusual alliance, the airports and airlines got together to actually do some initial thinking about 6 or 7 weeks ago on what a Trans-Tasman safe travel zone might look like from an airport and airline perspective. And as part of that, did a huge amount of operating planning, and Queenstown Airport was part of that. There's a huge amount of government work needed and agreements needed, and we know that our governments are actually doing that. But there are also a lot of practical operating requirements, and this is just sort of the stage, the stage one. I can tell you that in terms of a safe operating plan, Queenstown Airport actually has got that already in place. On 2 or 3 days' notice, we would be able to open the airport to Trans-Tasman travel. But there are a lot of other preconditions which are government to government, which really is the end-to-end public health story. It can't just be about what happens on a plane or what happens in an airport.
Yeah. Would anybody else like to add to that answer?
Obviously, the public health issues are paramount, and whatever we do, we have to make sure that all those measures are in place. I certainly think that once we can get to a stage where we're given opportunities to show that we are able to manage the university sector, could well look to managing student quarantine once a whole lot of other things have come into play, because I know that there's a whole lot of issues around regulation and all of those sorts of things that are still to be sorted. And then I think it's a case of, we talk about air bridges. I think there are clearly some countries that we could safely work with where they've got COVID under control, and that might be a way of thinking about it going forward.
Yeah, country by country. We have a question that's come through for Rachel, asking what kind of impact might the Southern Link have on New Zealand exports, if any? I know you're going to commission a study, but have you got any ideas at this point?
Well, I mean, I think definitely when you bring other countries closer by way of roads or rail or any kind of link, that definitely has a big positive impact on trade. So in terms of the impact on exports, I think also, even for example, the freight forwarder that I talked about earlier, so they started up 2 weeks before COVID hit. They thought that they might stop it, but actually what happened was through COVID, they started using a combination of sea freight and air freight to ship their products. And they got so much that they chartered a flight. So a lot of the speakers today have talked about the cost of air freight, and we have a lot of premium products in New Zealand. So obviously if we've got more flights, it's not just going to benefit the airports. It's also, I think, going to benefit the exporters.
Pier, I think we have one here that might be relevant for you. Someone's asked, you got it. Someone's asked, consumers seem to be increasingly concerned with privacy and data protection. Should businesses be concerned about privacy and data protection with the growth of e-commerce, particularly as China and Aotearoa have different privacy laws?
So there's two sides to that. There's the export side from a New Zealand perspective, and the import side, I guess, if you're shopping on some of the cross-border platforms. The first thing I would say is the levels of data protection and security in the Chinese big e-commerce platforms like Alibaba's are, I think absolutely the best in the world. You look at Alipay, which is our payment network, the fraud levels are much lower than typically on credit cards. We have the Alibaba economy, or the Alibaba ecosystem, which is roughly $1 trillion in value of goods traded, relies on consumer trust. So it relies on consumers having a single login to all the different platforms and marketplaces. So our privacy protection and security is, I would suggest, the best in the world. And China has its own rules on data protection, and if you, I guess, sell into that market, you follow those rules. It's the same thing if you, I'd say it's actually probably more tricky now for people who want to sell into Europe, because their laws are quite difficult, and you see all these things now with cookies, and you have to accept, and a lot of that relates to the EU rules. So I think China has a very clear privacy law, guidelines. The networks are very secure, and I would argue, as an exporter, that you're trying to reach Chinese consumers, so I don't really see the risk there. If you are going the other way, again, the big global marketplaces that sell globally, should adhere to the laws of the countries in which they operate. A problem becomes a small country like New Zealand. If it makes those laws too different or too onerous, then platforms may choose, not to participate in that market, which would be a loss for consumers. So that's why I think New Zealand has recently signed a digital economic partnership agreement, which was Chile and Singapore, and it's a really innovative agreement looking at digital cooperation and how you can kind of align or at least have the same principles in things like privacy laws. And my understanding is that agreement can expand to other countries. So, I think it's just one of those things. Different countries have different parameters, and if you're a global business or global economy, an export economy like we are, we just have to adhere to those. But I would say that in terms of Chinese consumers, the security and the confidence that consumers have in going online is much higher than it would be in the West. And that's thanks to the incredibly strong data security that all the platforms in China operate under.
Yeah, interesting. We've got questions flooding in here, but can I just check? Yeah, we have got one from the floor. Can we get a microphone in here, please? Yeah, it might be. No, here we go.
Thank you. A question for Professor Dixon and all. I should make it clear it's not my idea. I borrowed that from one of your competitors at Mass University. The idea is, and the question is, New Zealand should really charter a cruise ship or two, having all available Chinese students on board and having 14-day quarantine while on board. So upon arrival, they would be ready to join our community. And how about entertaining such kind of idea?
Well, that's an interesting idea. People might not feel so welcome about cruise ships after the experience of watching what happened during lockdown, I think. I think it's an interesting proposition, and clearly one of the challenges we've got is how do we actually bring back a very significant number of students quite quickly for the beginning of semester one next year. And we're not sure yet whether that will happen. I think we're going to have to just work our way through with government on how best to achieve it. And remember that I made a comment before about social licence for international students. We've also got a job to do with the public who want to be absolutely assured that students are not going to, it's not going to be problematic. Now, I'm very confident that they won't be actually in terms of bringing COVID in, but nonetheless, we are going to have to take the public with us. So I'm not sure that cruise ships is necessarily a good idea.
Yeah, out of interest, who here plans to go on a cruise ship anytime in the next year? Do you want to raise your hand? Just interested. One? Okay. I think we've got, this time is not right, I think we've got 5 minutes left. So is there anything that we can take from the floor? Is there another question that anyone has? Something?
Yeah, I'd still like to understand a little bit more about the Southern Link, what value that brings to New Zealand, because goods are just moving through. Although there would be increased capacity on the cargo flights, but really, it's just moving boxes at the end of the day, and maybe you can clip the ticket a little bit, but there isn't a lot of value add. Or is there?
We were hoping that there would be some passengers as well, for a start. There's some obstacles there around transit visas, etc., but obviously passengers would be great. And one thing we want the study to look at is also this concept around New Zealand acting as a business intermediary between China and between Latin America. So we do have some natural advantages there once again, things like CPTPP. Most of you will know that we were the first country to instigate that, and also the first country to sign the FTA with China. So there is some possibilities around that and around sort of regulatory development, etc. as well.
Also, because it's the last question, which refers to a project called EWTP, which is an Alibaba global initiative that relates quite closely to some of the objectives of the Southern Link. It's about making the global supply chain for e-commerce goods more efficient. And to that specific question, one of the things we looked at was the idea that if you start having all these air links, you could actually potentially start seeing businesses invest in regional hubs for storing, for selling. The Australian market's a really important one. You can move product to Australia very efficiently from New Zealand. So it could be, kind of China, New Zealand, Australia, maybe Pacific. There's all these offshoots. So I think the way we always looked at that is you create the regulatory frameworks to enable businesses to then invest. So I think the question is, if you create New Zealand as a hospitable place for global e-commerce goods, because a lot of these goods in the Southern Link would be e-commerce, not exclusively, I think you would see a lot of investment. And there's been some studies that we've commissioned a study on that, and there are significant benefits to New Zealand based on that study when you get that additional investment, and as consumer good as well, as more choice, and you get goods more quickly as well.
I think we've probably got time for one final question from the floor, if there is one. Can't see one. I might take one from the screen then, and I think it'll be for you, Jenny. We've got a question here asking, or sort of saying that students can be ambassadors for Brand New Zealand, but what sort of value difference will the education sector position itself as having in the global market?
Well, can I say that students and alumni are, in fact, lifelong ambassadors for New Zealand, which is why New Zealand universities spend a lot of time working with alumni, both in New Zealand and abroad. And any of you who know about the Colombo plan will remember just the impact that it has, even, I think, 40 years later when we travel to Southeast Asia and we meet up with our alumni who talk about that. So they are going to be lifelong ambassadors. The value proposition has been that New Zealand has always presented itself as being a safe place to study. There's no question that the way that we've dealt with COVID enhances that parents of Chinese students will feel, I think, even more confident about the fact that we can deal with that. But can I also say that when it comes to the crunch, parents and their children actually look for the quality of the academic programs that they're going to be studying, and safety and security and all of those things are context, but usually not when it comes to the crunch, the decision that they make their choice on.
Yeah, interesting.
I would just quickly add to that, although I'm standing between everybody and a drink. But one concept that's come through the council recently is also around grabbing the best students that are looking to go to the US for postgraduate. They might be aiming to go to Columbia or Harvard, etc. But say to them, come to New Zealand now, do your undergraduate, and then move on to do postgraduate in another country.
Yeah, thanks for that. And don't worry, there's a few things to go before drinks, so we'll just... but no, thank you very much. Can everyone please thank the panel, Jenny, Rachel, Adrienne, Lisa, and Pier. Thanks very much. Hi everybody, welcome back. Could everyone just grab their seats? I hope that you enjoyed this afternoon's sessions. I have ATEED's Pam Ford on the stage with me, who is the moderator for the stream next door on the impact of COVID on Auckland. Pam, would you perhaps like to go first and give a brief summary of your panel discussion?
Thanks, Tim. Kia ora koutou. I'll keep this really brief because I know we've got much more exciting things ahead of us. Our session was all about collaboration and people-to-people relationships in a COVID world where we can't travel. A few things that stood out was we have to start at home, and we've got lots of opportunities here in New Zealand, not only with our Chinese business community, but how we still work in silos and how we can mesh all of our different interest groups together to collaborate in a more purposeful way. We talked about the need for vision and leadership. So it's all very well to talk about collaboration, but if we don't have really strong vision and leadership of what we're all trying to achieve, then collaboration doesn't really serve a purpose. Each of the panel members were asked about their secret sauce. What's the secret sauce of collaboration? And outstandingly, it was all about being authentic, so no surprises there for you. And yes, I guess a key message from the whole day was we need to start collaboration at home across our China communities, our Asian communities, our Māori communities, our youth, everybody. So that's really where we got to, Tim. It was a really great conversation and some really challenging comments from the floor.
Great, sounds good. We had a lot of fun in this room. We were sort of spanning the sectors of e-commerce, travel and tourism, and education. I guess we heard a little bit about how e-commerce has really come into its own post-COVID. Pier Smulders from Alibaba reminded us that there are actually a lot of Chinese here in New Zealand and in Australia, and we should think of strategies that we can use to target those visitors, especially when the Trans-Tasman bubble reopens, since many of them use the same digital tools that are used in mainland China, but they're often missed in our tourism and other marketing campaigns. We heard from Professor Jenny Dixon, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Auckland, that over 50% of the university's international students are from China. And the university was able to adapt during that lockdown period with online learning. But she did sort of caution that the education sector is facing some significant challenges over the coming months because of that uncertainty. But of course, we also have that strengthened brand due to our health response. In terms of tourism, we heard from China Travel Services' Lisa Lee, who said that despite her business being severely affected by the industry being shut down effectively, she's been able to adapt and move into e-commerce, which was an interesting adaptation. And it should set the country up well if we can all do that well for a good recovery in the future. Then we heard from Adrienne Young-Cooper, the acting chair at Queenstown Airport, who said that Queenstown Airport expects to be cash flow positive in the 2021 financial year, thanks to all of us going there. But of course, we can't replace the loss of international tourists, which represent at least 25% of arrivals through the airport. And we had an update on the Southern Link from New Zealand China Council's Rachel Maidment. And I think what's exciting about this is it was a rare piece of positive COVID news. We heard that the two Latin American airlines have started to fly the Southern Link during the COVID period. And so that provides some excitement potentially for us in our trade and travel in the future. So thanks very much, Pam, for joining me on stage today. Some great points made, I think, in both sessions. Thanks.
Thanks.
So now I would like to hand over to our two co-chairs, Michael Barnett and Fran O'Sullivan. They're going to share their thoughts on the day and their key takeouts. Thanks both.